June 10, 1942. North Africa. The blazing sands outside Tobruk shimmer beneath the brutal midday sun. The heat is suffocating, thick, shimmering waves of it rolling off the desert floor. Inside a British Crusader tank, Corporal Arthur "Artie" Mills wipes the sweat from his brow and curses softly. The metal walls are so hot he can feel the burn through his uniform. His loader, Private George "Geordie" Shaw, reaches for a battered enamel mug resting precariously on the turret's floor. It's cold, empty, and hopelessly dry. "Bloody hell, I'd kill for a cuppa," Geordie mutters. Artie grins faintly. "If Jerry doesn't kill us first, I might hold you to that." Outside, the air hums with the distant crack of artillery. Sand blows in thin veils across the horizon, coating every surface in dust and despair. The crew has been inside their tank for nearly 12 hours, engines idling, waiting for orders. The water they carry is rationed for the radiator and their parched throats, not for the comfort of a brew. But for the British, tea is more than comfort. It's ritual. It's sanity. Suddenly, over the wireless, comes the order they've been dreading: advance to Point Blue. Armor spearhead. Move out. The tank lurches forward, treads grinding against the sand. The smell of oil, sweat, and hot metal fills the cramped interior. Through the narrow slit of the driver's visor, the desert seems endless, a furnace dotted with wreckage and black smoke. Half an hour later, after a brief and brutal exchange of fire with a German anti-tank gun, the Crusader falls silent. The crew survives, barely. The commander, Lieutenant Frank Harris, gives the all-clear. Right then, he says, pulling open the hatch and climbing halfway out. The sun blinds him. He scans the horizon for movement, none. He exhales, then grins. "Geordie, grab the Primus stove." Moments later, the unmistakable hiss of a small camp stove cuts through the desert stillness. A dented kettle rattles softly as it begins to boil. The crew gathers around, boots dug into the sand, their tank hulking behind them like a steel beast resting after battle. It's madness, boiling tea in the middle of a war zone, but to the British, it's sacred. The ritual of tea means normalcy, humanity, and something that still belongs to them, even when everything else burns. But as Artie sips his mug, a whistling sound cuts through the air. Down! A German mortar explodes less than 30 yards away, spraying sand and shrapnel. The men dive for cover, the kettle topples, boiling water spilling across the ground. Another explosion follows, closer this time. Harris scrambles back into the tank, shouting, "Inside! Move it, move it!" The crew slams the hatch shut just as another round hits nearby, rattling the steel walls. Inside, the men breathe heavily, hearts pounding. The tank is safe, for now. But the moment of calm, of tea and laughter, is gone. It's in that moment that Harris realizes the truth: every time they climb out to make tea, they risk their lives. The Germans know how to target movement, how to bait tank crews into exposing themselves. That night, as the desert cools and the engines fall silent, Harris sits in the dim glow of the tank's dashboard light, thinking. There has to be a better way, a safer way. If they could brew tea inside the tank, maybe they wouldn't lose men to something as simple, as human, as a cup of tea. He doesn't know it yet, but this thought, born out of exhaustion and longing for normalcy, will soon spark a quiet revolution in armored warfare. The British Army will listen. They'll innovate. And they'll create one of the strangest, most beloved inventions in military history, the boiling vessel. The night over Tobruk fades into a thin gray dawn. The Crusader tank sits silent, coated in a layer of desert dust. Inside, the crew stirs awake, groggy and dehydrated. Their water is nearly gone, and the last of the tea leaves are buried somewhere under spent shell casings. Lieutenant Harris makes a note in his field journal: "We need a safer way to boil water inside. Too dangerous outside the armor." He doesn't know it, but across North Africa, dozens of British tank crews are writing the same thing in their own logbooks. The lesson of the desert is brutally clear: the enemy doesn't rest, and stepping outside your tank, even for a moment, can get you killed. London, England, autumn 1942. Hundreds of miles from the front lines, at the Ministry of Supply's engineering offices in London, a small group of designers gathers around a stack of reports from the desert campaigns. The engineers aren't soldiers, they're technicians, draftsmen, men in lab coats and spectacles. But they read the same haunting line over and over again. Crewmen killed while making tea outside of vehicles. The phrase seems absurd at first glance, men dying for tea, but to the British, it's deadly serious. Tea is part of the national identity, a morale anchor that threads through every layer of the army. From the trenches of World War I to the dunes of North Africa, a hot mug of tea is more than hydration, it's hope in liquid form. Captain Reginald Thompson, a practical, sharp-minded officer with the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, studies one report closely. He circles a paragraph and mutters, "If we can power radios and turret motors off the engine, we can damn well power a kettle." He calls for his lead technician, Sergeant Leonard Price, and together they begin sketching. What they imagine is simple yet revolutionary: a small, sealed metal vessel that could use the tank's electrical system to heat water safely from inside. No open flame, no fuel, no exposure. They name it the boiling vessel, or simply BV. Prototype trials, 1943. The first working boiling vessel prototype is installed in a Cromwell tank at a testing ground in Surrey. It's crude, just a small cylindrical pot connected to the electrical grid, tucked near the driver's compartment. The engineers gather as the tank crew climbs inside, wires humming softly in the cool air. "Power on," says Thompson. The BV glows faintly. Water begins to tremble. Steam rises within minutes. Inside the tank, a young gunner grins as he pours the first ever in-tank brew. The smell of strong black tea fills the confined space, oil, steel, and Earl Grey blending in a way that somehow makes perfect sense. "Bloody marvelous," he laughs. The test is an immediate success. Word spreads quickly through armored divisions: the new Cromwells can make tea without opening the hatch. Morale skyrockets. Crews call it the best thing since armor plating. The engineers are told to install the device in every future tank model. Soon, Churchills, Comets, and Centurions all leave the factory with a built-in kettle, the first armies in history to make hot tea under fire. But not everyone sees the BV as just a comfort tool. For some commanders, it's a tactical advantage. Crews no longer need to expose themselves to the enemy or risk breaking formation during long waits between advances. A warm drink also keeps soldiers alert during freezing nights or exhausting desert patrols. By 1944, the boiling vessel isn't just a quirky British addition, it's a survival mechanism. Tank crews can now brew tea, rehydrate dehydrated rations, or heat water for medical use, all within the armored belly of their machines. In a war where seconds mean life or death, the BV quietly saves lives not through firepower, but through warmth and safety. As the Allies prepare for the invasion of Normandy, British tank crews take comfort in knowing that wherever they go, from the sands of Africa to the hedgerows of France, they carry a little piece of home inside their tanks. And for the men who live and fight inside those armored beasts, that comfort is priceless. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy are chaos, a cacophony of artillery, smoke, and shouted orders echoing across the Channel surf. The British 7th Armoured Division, the famed Desert Rats, has returned to the fight, this time not against Rommel's panzers in the desert, but against entrenched German forces in the bocage of northern France. In the early morning haze, a column of Churchill tanks rumbles inland from Gold Beach, their treads grinding over mud and shattered hedgerows. Inside one of them, the air is thick with the smell of cordite and sweat. The crew hasn't eaten in nearly 12 hours. Sergeant Frank Harris, the same man who once brewed tea under fire in the North African desert, now commands this tank. His voice crackles over the intercom. Loader, status? Rounds ready, sir. Driver? Moving steady. Road's a bloody swamp. The tank jolts as a shell explodes nearby, throwing dirt across the hull. The gunner's hands tremble slightly as he reloads. Harris glances at his men, pale, tired, eyes sunken from days without rest. He takes a breath, flips a small switch near his seat, and smiles. Right then, lads. Time for a brew. Within minutes, the faint hum of the boiling vessel fills the tank. The smell of hot water and powdered tea drifts through the cramped space, cutting through the stench of diesel and fear. The loader chuckles. Only the British would stop for tea in a war zone. Harris grins. Only the British would win a war with one. They laugh softly, just for a moment. And in that moment, amid chaos, the tank feels like home. Normandy's fields, summer 1944. The British armoured divisions learn quickly that the boiling vessel is more than a luxury. It's a lifeline. Tanks often spend long hours idle, waiting for orders, clearing mines, or maintaining defensive positions. In the past, crews would have risked stepping outside for a fire or cold rations. Now, they can stay inside, protected from snipers and artillery, while still keeping their strength up. During one push near Cannes, a Cromwell squadron is pinned down under heavy German shelling. For 6 hours, they remain in position, engines silent. Inside, the men sweat and whisper, nerves stretched to breaking. Then a low voice comes over the radio, "Right lads, put the kettle on." It becomes a signal of calm. A reassurance that they're still human, still in control. By dusk, when the shelling finally stops, the crews emerge from their tanks, shaken but alive. Several report later that without the BV, they'd have risked exposure just to boil water or stretch their legs. Many others hadn't realized how close they'd come to being targeted by enemy scouts. The boiling vessel, humble as it seems, has done its job once again, quietly saving lives through simple practicality. Back home in Britain. News of the boiling vessel's success spreads through the ranks and into British newspapers. Soldiers write home about it, describing it as the greatest invention since the tank itself. Letters from the front mention the comfort of tea brewed under fire, the way it reminds them of their mothers, their sweethearts, their kitchens back home. The Ministry of Information catches on. Propaganda posters appear showing a smiling tank crew enjoying a cup of tea between battles, the slogan reading, "Wherever they fight, there's always time for tea." It's both comical and poignant. A cup of tea has become a symbol of endurance, of quiet defiance. The British soldier doesn't stop for luxury, he stops for morale. Late 1944, the Ardennes. As the war grinds on, temperatures drop. Snow piles high on the tanks, and engines struggle to start. In the freezing forests of Belgium, the boiling vessel becomes more vital than ever. Inside a Comet tank of the 11th Armored Division, Corporal Geordie Shaw, now older and battle-worn, wraps his gloved hands around a steaming mug. His breath fogs the air as he looks through the vision slit, the world outside a blur of snow and smoke. The BV's low hum fills the silence. It's a small sound, but to men half frozen, it's the sound of comfort, of life. In after-action reports, commanders note fewer cases of frostbite, dehydration, and heat exhaustion among British crews compared to other armies. The simple ability to make hot tea or soup inside the vehicle has tangible, measurable benefits. The boiling vessel isn't just morale, it's medicine. By the end of the war, the BV becomes standard equipment across all British armoured units. Crews refuse to go to battle without it. And when the war finally ends, veterans will later say it was one of the few pieces of kit that never failed them, a faithful companion through fire, sand, and snow. What started as a desperate desert improvisation has become a defining feature of British tank design. And its legacy is only beginning. Spring, 1945. Germany. The war is drawing to its brutal conclusion. The fields are soaked with rain, the roads choked with wrecked vehicles and retreating soldiers. Among the armored columns pushing toward the Rhine, British tanks roll forward, engines growling, mud caking their sides. Inside a Churchill Mk7, Sergeant Frank Harris leans back against the steel hull. The fighting has been relentless, the air thick with the smell of burning fuel and cordite. His men are exhausted, eyes red, nerves frayed. And yet, in this small metal world, the boiling vessel hums softly. Steam rises from enamel mugs. Harris watches his crew drink in silence, the faint rattle of gunfire echoing outside. The war is almost over, and in this moment, the tank feels more like a home than a weapon. He raises his cup slightly. To the mad little kettle that got us this far, he mutters. The men smile. The BV has become more than an invention, it's a symbol. The war ends, but the BV stays. When the guns finally fall silent in May 1945, thousands of British tanks stand scattered across Europe. Many will be scrapped, others sent to distant colonies, and a few kept as training vehicles. But among the countless innovations born from 6 years of total war, radar, jet engines, proximity fuses, one humble creation quietly endures, the boiling vessel. Military historians would later joke that while the Americans gave the world the atomic bomb, the British gave it the tea kettle. But among soldiers, there's nothing humorous about it. The BV had kept men alive, not just physically, but mentally. Post-war evaluations by the Royal Armoured Corps record a significant drop in non-combat casualties due to exposure and dehydration. Tank crews with access to a boiling vessel stayed more alert and coordinated in extended operations. The device was simple, durable, and beloved, everything a piece of military kit should be. And so, the British Army made a decision: every armored vehicle from now on would have a BV installed. The Cold War era, the BV becomes tradition. By the 1950s, British tank design had evolved dramatically. The sleek Centurion and later the Chieftain rolled off production lines, bristling with advanced armor, electronics, and firepower. But nestled quietly inside each one was the same small, boxy boiling vessel, unchanged in spirit from the original desert prototype. Crews affectionately called it the bivvy. In training fields from Salisbury Plain to the frozen German frontiers, the hum of the BV became as familiar as the engine's idle. Whether during a freezing night watch or after a long exercise, a cup of steaming tea could turn a steel shell into a haven. The Americans who served alongside British crews often laughed at the obsession. One U.S. tank commander reportedly quipped, "The Brits may lose their tempers, their tanks, and their toehold, but they'll never lose their tea." And yet, when NATO operations dragged long into the cold evenings of the 1960s, even American and Canadian soldiers began to envy the idea. The British BV became a small legend, an emblem of stubborn practicality wrapped in national identity. The Falklands and the Modern Age. South Atlantic. British armored vehicles were limited in the Falklands terrain, but the spirit of the BV went with every unit. Portable boiling vessels were issued to infantry and logistics teams, giving soldiers a way to brew tea and heat rations in the freezing island winds. Reports from the front mention that hot drinks kept morale high during long, rain-soaked nights in the hills. Even in an age of precision missiles and computerized warfare, the humble act of making tea remained a tactical advantage, one that calmed nerves, boosted energy, and gave structure to the endless waiting that defines combat. By the time the Challenger 1 entered service in the 1980s, and later, the Challenger 2 in the 1990s, the boiling vessel was not just standard, it was celebrated. Its design was modernized, capable of heating soup, tea, or even sterilizing water in emergencies. Some models included a small tap and a safety fuse. The BV had become a piece of military culture, so deeply embedded that no British crew would imagine serving without it. Modern conflicts, tea on the front lines. Afghanistan, 2008. A Challenger 2 tank sits half buried in dust outside a small patrol base. The crew hasn't slept in over a day. Through the open hatch, the heat of the desert presses down like a hammer. Inside, the gunner, Corporal Darren Pike, reaches for the BV switch. Within minutes, the familiar hiss of boiling water fills the cramped interior. He drops a tea bag into his cup, gives it a stir, and passes it to his commander. It's a ritual repeated by generations, from Harris's Crusader in North Africa to Pike's Challenger in Helmand. The tools have changed, the wars have shifted, but the small act of boiling water in a machine built for destruction still brings peace to the men who operate it. And for many, that simple act carries a strange, comforting continuity, a connection to the tankers who came before. The world takes notice. Today, military historians cite the boiling vessel as a rare example of soft innovation, a human-centered invention in a world obsessed with firepower. Its inclusion in every British armoured vehicle since World War II marks it as one of the longest-serving pieces of equipment in military history. Even modern NATO allies have taken inspiration. Some armoured vehicles in Canada, Australia, and even the United States now include similar heating systems, not just for tea, but for morale, meals, and medicine. What began as an improvised desert survival trick is now global military standard practice. Legacy of warmth in a Cold War machine. In the annals of warfare, the boiling vessel stands as an oddity, a device that didn't kill, didn't destroy, and didn't dominate the battlefield. Instead, it preserved the humanity of those who fought. It kept men warm in the cold. It gave them rest in exhaustion. And, in moments between battles, it reminded them of why they fought at all: home, family, and the small comforts that make life worth defending. Even today, British tankers joke that if all systems fail, at least the kettle will still work. But behind the humor lies truth. The boiling vessel became the quiet heartbeat of the armored corps, a companion in steel that turned war's machinery into something just a little more human. Because sometimes, survival doesn't come from the biggest gun or the thickest armor. Sometimes, it comes from a cup of hot tea shared in silence. Inside a tank, under fire.